Hello everyone, my name is Aurelia, and now I'd like to share a past that I'll never forget. Every time I contemplate it, my heart sinks, and I am unable to stop hating myself. It is a narrative that I regret having lived. But life does not always make things simple. It all began many years ago when I was just 18, living with my family in London, such a beautiful city, but with its own hidden darkness back then. I thought I had everything. My family was wealthy, and both my parents were successful. My father was a busy businessman, and my mother was a skilled interior designer. Despite their busy lives, they always made time for me and my two older twin brothers, Damien and Cassius, who were 2 years older than me. And if I had to describe it, to be honest, I've always felt lucky to have them as brothers. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video until the end and like the video, because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. As the youngest in the family, I was spoiled by my parents. They never allowed me to want for anything, whether it was material goods or affection. But to be honest, watching out for me in the way they loved me felt more meaningful than my parents' love, because they constantly communicated it via acts and gestures born of deep care. My parents loved me by giving me a comfortable existence, but Damien and Cassius did more than they fully knew. When I was sad, they noticed even if I didn't say a word. They were always the ones I could confide in, without fear of judgment. When I was younger, if I fell or was bullied at school, Damien and Cassius were the first to step in and defend me. Once I was mocked by classmates because of a dress I wore, and when I came home crying, they didn't just comfort me. They went to the school to confront those kids. They didn't use violence, but they were like heroes to me, always ready to aid when I needed them. I recall the evenings. When our entire family gathered, I insisted on sitting between Damien and Cassius, and they'd throw their arms around me, sometimes even bickering over who would sit next to me. They often joked about me being their little princess and claimed it was their lifetime job to protect me. Over time, I began to realize that their love for me was different from anyone. They were also the first to help me through my teenage insecurities when I felt unsure about my appearance. Cassius would spend evenings teaching me how to apply light makeup and reassure me that I was beautiful, just the way I was. Damien helped me pick out clothes, always calling me the cutest little sister in the world. They made me feel cherished. And their love was something special in my eyes. They weren't just my brothers. They were my emotional rock whenever my parents were busy with work. Damien and Cassius were the ones who took me to school, helped with my homework, and ensured I never felt lonely. Late at night, if I couldn't sleep, I would knock on their door and they'd always greet me with a warm smile. And sometimes they would tell me funny stories or simply sit by me until I drifted off to sleep. It was those small things that made me believe in their love for me. It was far greater than anything I ever received from my parents. But that love, the one I believed Belly to be pure and innocent, would eventually lead to a haunting experience that changed everything. I'm not sure if anyone will truly understand, but when I was 18, something happened that completely altered my life. I will tell you the rest when I get the courage to confront that aspect of my memories. I recall it vividly because, as the youngest member of the family, I frequently engaged in foolish behavior. Without fear of reprimanding, I would occasionally jump in and hug them or casually sit on their laps if they were sitting somewhere. Damien and Cassius weren't just my brothers, they were my closest friends, people I never felt shy around, even when expressing affection. One afternoon on a warm summer day, I walked out of my bedroom, the sunlight streaming through the large living room window, creating a peaceful atmosphere. And Damien and Cassius were sitting on the sofa. I didn't know what they were watching on TV, but they appeared to be very absorbed in it. Without thinking, I walked closer, rubbing my eyes. They didn't notice me approaching, so I mischievously jumped onto the sofa and sat on both their laps. Damien was startled, and Cassius burst out laughing. "What exactly are you doing, little sister?" Chuckled, said nothing, and settled comfortably on their laps, resting my head on Damien's shoulder. "What are you two watching so intently?" I asked, but didn't get an immediate response. When I glanced at the screen, I realized it was a romantic movie, and just as the movie was reaching its emotional climax, the two characters on screen were hugging and sharing a passionate kiss. Seeing me staring at the screen, both Damien and Cassius became awkward. Cassius. I grinned sheepishly and swiftly covered my eyes with his palm. "Don't look, Aurelia. This isn't a kid's movie." I chuckled, attempting to wiggle free of his hands. "I'm not a child. I'm 18 now." I mocked, but internally I found the scenario rather intriguing. Continued trying to peek through Cassius's fingers, laughing and teasing them at the same time. At that moment, I unconsciously moved my hand to balance myself on Cassius's lap. Whether intentional or not, my hand brushed something inside his pocket. The hard, warm feeling startled me and my heart raced. I quickly pulled my hand back. I didn't dare look at either Damien or Cassius. "I'm sorry," I stammered. I hurriedly got up and dashed to my room. I slammed the door behind me, my heart pounding. I sat on my bed, wondering what had just happened. The image of the remote control in Cassius's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face flush. Was I overthinking it, or was it an accident? I didn't know, but the shame and embarrassment lingered, and I couldn't bring myself to leave my room. The thought of what Damien and Cassius might think of me kept me in my room, unable to shake off the image that haunted me. It wasn't just that I was getting hungry, and I knew my family was probably waiting for me to join them for dinner. But the events of the afternoon still lingered in my mind, and I felt a bit embarrassed. I kept wondering if Damien and Cassius were thinking about what had happened. But then I reassured myself that maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought, and perhaps they had already forgotten about it. I opened the door quietly and tiptoed down the hallway, hoping not to meet their eyes as I approached. I tiptoed into the living room, scared to catch their eyes, but to my amazement, no one was there. How odd, I thought. I halted in front of the sofa where I had been with them earlier that afternoon. I was still trying to figure out which channel was on the TV when two faces bent down from behind me, looking in the same direction. "What exactly are you doing, Aurelia?" Cassius's voice rang out right next to my ear, making me jump. Damien laughed loudly from the other side, adding, "You look like a thief." I let out a small scream from shock, turning around to see them standing right behind me, their sudden appearance nearly stopping my heart, and we all jumped at the same time. Cassius and Damien gazed at me, then erupted into laughter, leaving me unable to contain my amusement and fear. "Oh my God, you two terrified me to death," I exclaimed, trying to be angry but unable to conceal my laughter, like if I'd just been taunted suddenly by Ed. "How about you? You appear to be up to something shady." Damien raised his brow, smiled mischievously, and Cassius rubbed my head teasingly. "You are not intending on eating," and I chuckled along with you. At that point, the awkward tension from the afternoon seemed to fade away. I reassured myself that what I had touched earlier must not have been what I had imagined, because otherwise the two of them would not be laughing like this. With that thought, I felt a sense of relief and tried to act as if nothing had happened. I was just checking to see if anyone was here. I smiled warmly, hoping to change the subject. "What exactly are you two? What are you doing behind me? Are you trying to terrify me?" Cassius shrugged, appearing to be serious. "Yeah, I just wanted to scare you. A little, but I didn't expect you to be so startled," Damien added, his voice playful. "Who would have thought you'd jump up like that?" Your expression was priceless, causing us all to burst into laughter. The atmosphere became lighter and more cheerful at this point. Damien placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Okay, let's go eat. The entire family is waiting." For you, I nodded, smiled, and followed them into the kitchen. The family was already gathered around the dining table. My parents smiled gently when they saw me come in, and I sat down, feeling the warmth of the kitchen and the peaceful, cozy environment. During dinner, the conversation was full of laughter. My parents talked about work while Damien and Cassius occasionally teased me with light jokes. I joined in, and the feeling of embarrassment from earlier seemed to have dissipated. As I lay in bed, reflecting on the events, I assisted my mother with the dishes before retiring to my room to prepare for bed. Throughout the afternoon and the mocking just now, I no longer felt worried. Instead, I was ashamed. I smiled to myself, convincing myself that everything would be okay. Damien and Cassius are still the best brothers I've ever had. I fell asleep peacefully the next morning, but things weren't quite over in my room, and Damien and Cassius's rooms were only separated by a thin wall, so even the smallest sounds like movies or music could be heard. I was known for sleeping late, but that morning I woke up at 7 a.m. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, or maybe the sunlight through the curtains was blinding me. But no, after a few minutes of waking up, I realized there was a strange sound coming from the next room. My room was positioned between Damien's and Cassius's rooms, and our house had thin walls, so even the slightest noise traveled easily. I was used to hearing them play games or talk, but this time the sound was different. At first, I assumed they were watching an action movie. Something was odd with the sound. It wasn't like ordinary movie noises. It had a peculiar rhythm to it, sometimes lengthy, sometimes short. My pulse began to race, and a notion came to mind, making my cheeks flush. I didn't want to believe it, but the sound became clearer. It wasn't music, and it wasn't just regular talking. Even though the walls blocked the sound, I could still hear rapid, sensual noises mixed with heavy breathing. I tried to ignore it, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that Damien and Cassius were watching something special. A rush of shame washed over me. Why was I awake? Why did I have to hear this? My heart was racing, and I felt like I was burning. I put my hands over my face, trying to stop the thoughts that kept invading my mind. This is private, I told myself. Everyone has seen things like that, even I have. But hearing it coming from their room made me uncomfortable. We had always been close, and I never imagined facing this situation. I didn't want to hear it, but the sound seemed to cling to me clearer and clearer. I got up and got out of bed. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I couldn't sit motionless any longer. I strolled quietly. I walked down the hallway, trying not to make any noise, but when I got to Damien and Cassius's door, the sound became quite apparent. It seemed like the walls had vanished. I remained there, wondering what was happening to my heart, and I felt humiliated, bewildered, and hesitant. I had always heard that these things happened, but hearing it from Damien and Cassius's room was a whole other experience. I chewed on my lip, contemplating whether I should go back to my room or remain where I felt most comfortable, and I leaned against the door, trying to find some peace. The music just became louder, drawing me in. The door swung open, and I moved backward. In surprise, Cassius stood in front of me, eyes wide with shock, as if he'd been caught up in something he shouldn't have been doing. We stood there facing each other for what felt like an eternity, the silence unbearable. Cassius cleared his throat, attempting to break the tension. "Aurelia, what are you doing here?" he inquired, his voice agitated, avoiding eye contact, his cheeks flushed, and I could see he was as uncomfortable as I was. I was also unable to gaze at him. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was unable to articulate my thoughts. "I was just passing by," I stammered. It didn't sound convincing, but it was the only thing I could think of at the moment. Just then the sounds inside the room suddenly stopped. Damien walked out from behind Cassius's face, as red as Cassius's. They both exchanged glances, trying to find the right explanation, but no one said anything. The awkward silence was overwhelming, and I forced an uncomfortable smile, trying to hide my embarrassment. I was just passing by. I'm leaving. Nothing turned and quickly walked away, eager to escape the situation. When I got back to my room, I quickly closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and a strange, embarrassing feeling washed over me. I couldn't stop replaying the awkward scene in my head. The image of Cassius opening the door and Damien's expression when he stepped out lingered in my mind. The atmosphere between the three of us was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake off the feeling. I kept wondering what they were thinking about me at that moment. Maybe they felt as awkward as I did, or perhaps even more so. What bothered me most was the fact that I had overheard something I shouldn't have. It might have been an unfortunate accident, but I feared it would change how I saw Damien and Cassius, my two closest brothers, my protectors and my companions. Put my hands over my face, trying to block out the negative thoughts, but the more I tried to ignore them, the louder, tighter they became. I told myself that this was just an unexpected moment, something no one wanted to happen. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I couldn't help it. I stood up, pacing around my room, trying to shake off the unease. It was just an accident. I muttered to myself, as if trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal, but deep down I knew something had to change. Something had to make this feel normal again. My heart sank as I heard a knock on my door. I knew it couldn't be my parents. They didn't usually knock when they needed me, but it had to be Damien or Cassius. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves before opening the door. When I did, I found Cassius standing there, still looking flustered, his eyes averted, clearly trying to regain his composure. He scratched his head awkwardly, a shy smile on his lips. "Aurelia, I'm sorry about what happened earlier. It's not what you think. Damien and I were just watching a movie. Perhaps the time wasn't ideal." I stood still for a moment, looking at him with hesitant eyes. His face was red, his gaze uncertain, and I could sense the confusion in his voice. Then Damien stepped up behind him, his face showing the same shyness and embarrassment as Cassius's. Both of them were trying to find the right words, but the tension was so thick we couldn't seem to speak it. As if we were all waiting for someone to break the quiet, I understood that if this awkward moment persisted, it would only worsen. So I took a big breath and decided to initiate the conversation. I gave a grin. Feeling a little uncomfortable but trying to seem casual, I added, "Come on. I didn't mean to make things awkward," hoping to lighten the situation. "Don't look so tight." Was just passing by. Cassius and Damien exchanged a quiet gaze. After a minute of conversing through their gaze, Cassius sighed and smiled weakly. "Are you sure, Aurelia? You don't feel uncomfortable?" he questioned, his voice full of worry. I instantly reassured them, "No, I'm fine. Actually, I suppose I love you both." More I added hastily, hoping to make them laugh. They both looked at me surprised, and for a little time there was a silent understanding between us. Then I thought of a way to make things less awkward. I took Cassius's hand and pointed to Damien's. "Let's go to my room and chat." "Okay, let's consider this as making up for the unpleasantness I mentioned." Both of them were astonished by the idea, but after a little pause they nodded. It appeared to be the only solution. To relieve the tension, I smiled and turned to go toward my room, with the two of them following gently behind until the three of us sat down on my bed. I decided to lighten the situation by making a joke. "The movie was so good that you both lost track of time," I taunted, turning to Damien. Damien chuckled nervously, hiding his face with his hands. "Please, Aurelia, stop teasing. It's just we didn't think you'd hear it really. I thought you guys turned it up so I could hear it," I said with a playful raise of my eyebrows that made both of us laugh. and for a moment the tension seemed to vanish. After engaging in a lengthy conversation, my curiosity overcame me. I glanced at Damien and Cassius, wondering if I should bring up the thought that had just crossed my mind. After a brief hesitation, I mustered up the courage and asked how we tried. I wasn't sure how they would react, but my curiosity overcame me, and Damien and Cassius turned to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you startled by what I said?" Damien inquired, perplexed. He appeared surprised that I was suggesting something so daring, so I nodded, trying to keep my expression serious. I was simply interested. It wouldn't harm to try. "Right," I murmured, though my voice weakened, and I couldn't look them in the eye. Cassius responded swiftly, his tone hard, and both of them turned away from me. But I didn't give up and gently gripped their hands, reassuring them that they only needed to try it once. "I truly want to." They knew what it was like. They remained mute for a while, and I could see the conflict in their eyes. After a moment, Damien sighed and said, with a look of helplessness, "Okay, but just this once, and we have to keep it a secret so no one knows." The room became still, and we all sat there, breathing. We began gently, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Every movement and motion was cautious, but also full of a weird energy. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it felt as if the world around us had vanished, leaving only the three of us. When it was finished, the sun had risen high. Filling the room with light, we didn't say anything. We just lay there next to each other, breathing evenly. The awkwardness I had feared completely vanished. Instead, I felt a deeper connection between us, as if we had just gone through something intense together. We went into the kitchen to prepare lunch, and everything felt oddly natural, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside I knew that the boundary between us had shifted, and instead of regret, I felt. "Are you all right?" he inquired softly. I just nodded. I returned his grin, saying, "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more." Words made me blush, but they held my hand with warmth, their eyes filled with affection. "We love you too," they said, and we continued eating from that day on. Our relationship subtly but clearly changed. The closeness we had shared was now something else, something deeper. There was no awkwardness, and it was as though any invisible distance between us had vanished every time our relationship subtly but clearly changed. The closeness we had shared was now something else, something deeper. There was no awkwardness, and it was as though any invisible distance between us had vanished every time our eyes met. I could feel a new understanding, a closeness that had never been there before. But deep down I know what we did was wrong. We had crossed a line unknowingly, breaking the boundaries that society and morality had set. I tell myself it was because of the impulsive curiosity of youth. I don't try to justify it, but it was our emotions and curiosity that led us down this path. I don't regret it, but sometimes I still feel a vague anxiety. We don't talk about it anymore, as if it's an unspoken agreement to leave it in the past. The way Damien and Cassius now look at me is different. They are gentler with me, more careful, as though afraid to hurt me, and as for me, every time I look into their eyes, my heart flutters with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Our curiosity led us down an unexpected path, and while our bond is stronger than ever, I know things will never be the same again. Looking back, I realize that my impulsive actions have left an indelible mark on our relationship, and I can never undo the fact that we crossed a line guided solely by our emotions and curiosity. And though no one else knows, I can't hide it from myself. Every time I reflect on it, I realize how immature I was, and that realization haunts me. What I've learned is that curiosity is natural, especially when you're young, but not all curiosity should be indulged, especially when it risks violating the fundamental principles of life. Life borders aren't supposed to confine us, but to protect us from making mistakes that can leave lasting harm. Sometimes staying grounded and holding back is the most important thing. Through my story, I want to tell everyone, don't let fleeting curiosity lead you into making the wrong decisions. Stop and think about the consequences before acting. Strong emotions may fade, but their consequences can last forever. Value the relationships you have in life, and don't easily cross boundaries just for the sake of temporary desire.